much. We are ready to finish our last set of notes. And we will, thanks to my front row people for keeping me on track, take our test next Wednesday. So we have an assignment that looks at the Panama Canal today and tomorrow. And then Monday, we have one last kind of bigger assignment so that we can look at the whole big picture of imperialism. Tuesday, we'll review, and then Wednesday will be our test. And then Thursday, for those of you that are here, will just kind of be a day before spring break day.
Is the test going to be on the next grading period?
Yes, yeah. Hey, people, yeah, because the test is next week. Integrating period's tomorrow. So, all right, let's close up our laptops. Pay attention. About grades, I am not adding anything new to this grading period. So those of you that have looked at your grade, that yes, we'll talk. Those of you that I've got everything graded, so I'm not adding anything else. That's the grade that's going to be on your report card. All right, so our last section is dealing with the United States and Latin America. And in particular, good, yeah. And in particular, we're going to be looking at two things, one of which has a worldwide importance, and that's what your assignment will be because of the significance will be the Panama Canal. Tipton, you want to close up your laptop for me? Thank you very much. So we are going to look again at how the United States is going to deal with Latin America. More importantly, how Latin America and the United States interact. All right, we got a couple of definitions. And one of them is very important, territorial integrity. And it is something, again, that the United States as a democratic nation has used in the past to reprimand other countries. Countries should not try to overthrow the government in another country. The United States stands very strongly about that countries shouldn't do that. But sometimes we have done that. And we'll see, especially when we get into Latin America. A protectorate, when a bigger country protects a little country in exchange for resources or some other advantage. And the United States is, again, going to do that we did that with Hawaii for a bit, but we're also going to do it with some of our countries in Latin America. At this point, Latin America or South America has completely rid itself of Spain. But what has happened is some of the other bigger countries like Colombia are in control of some of the smaller countries like Venezuela and those places. And so the United States is going to get involved in that. In Puerto Rico and Cuba, we are going to look at this thing called the Monroe Doctrine that passes way back during President James Monroe's presidency. And essentially it says to Europe, stay out of this hemisphere. This is our hemisphere. We will protect anything that needs to be protected. Stay out. President Roosevelt is going to add a little snippet to that. He's going to add a little snippet to that and make it called the Roosevelt Corollary. Thank you, Carly. And what President Roosevelt's going to add is not only do you need to stay out, Monroe Doctrine, but if you don't, the United States can use force. We will use force in Latin America to protect our economic interest. And this is the big stick policy or diplomacy. Speak softly, carry a big stick. And for the United States, that big stick is the United States Navy, United States Army, that we will again respond to. What are we doing, people? What is happening? Okay. Yeah, that's what's happening. Thank you. All right. So that's what we're looking at. Speak softly, carry a big stick. And that will be the Roosevelt Corollary. In Puerto Rico, Congress is going to pass the Volcker Act, and it establishes a civil government in Puerto Rico. And pretty much most of these things are the same for Puerto Ricans today, except the president doesn't appoint a governor. They elect their own governor. President could appoint a governor. President could appoint part of the legislature, could assess taxes on Puerto Rican goods sold in the United States. Puerto Ricans are going to protest against this, and Wilson is going to sign in the Jones Act, which gives more rights and more control to Puerto Ricans. I mistakenly spoke. It's the Jones Act that's in control today. So Puerto Ricans elect a governor. They have their own legislature. They have representation. Again, they are rightfully citizens and access to those things that citizens have access to. So we've kind of settled all the issues with Cuba and Puerto Rico, essentially, again, saying these are our territories. Do not interfere with our territories. We will respond with some kind of force if we have to. So the next part of taking control of Central and South America is the building of the Panama Canal. The French had tried to start building a canal that would connect the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean. The French had built a canal in Africa, well, Southeast Asia, that connect the Red Sea and the Mediterranean, called the Suez Canal. And the engineering principles for that will be very different because we're in a desert, and moving sand is a whole lot easier than moving jungle. And so the French have not been able to complete this Panama Canal deal, and the United States said, we'd like to take it over. So that begins the process of the United States beginning to build this engineering marvel of the beginning of the 20th century. So the United States desperately wants a canal. In 1850, the U.S. and Britain agreed to share this idea. However, the French are going to get a hold of it first. There's two routes that they could consider. One that's going to go through Nicaragua. There's a big lake there. It's longer, but the lake is going to make it easier for the ships to move. And then the other one, obviously, we know that they pick because it's called the Panama Canal. It's much, much shorter, but geographically, the topography is difficult. There are mountains, there are swamps, and so that becomes the difficulty. So the first one is up in Nicaragua, which the advantage of that was that lake that the boats could float through. Or obviously, when you're thinking about the distance between point A and point B, you want to go with the smallest amount of territory. So while that is a perfect place as far as there's not a lot, what's in that short little part is incredibly difficult topography or environment to move around, which is why the French gave up. They said, this is too difficult. We're not going to do it. A lot of other things. The guy that's attempting to build the Panama Canal is the same guy that builds the Eiffel Tower. So he knows what he's doing. It's just difficult. So French companies trying to buy it. So the United States says, hey, we think we can do this. We'll buy it from you. And we buy it from the French for $40 million. Some of the best $40 million we ever spent. Part of the difficulty in this area is that Panama is a country, but it's under Colombian rule. So somehow we have to get that out of Colombian rule. So what we decide is let's just move our ships there. We're going to bring some warships around Panama and say to the people in Panama, hey, declare your independence. Just say you're independent. We got our warships here. We'll help you out. So in one of the shortest independence revolutions ever, 15 days, 10 million G's, a rent of $250,000, a handshake, we got ourselves a canal. That is the power of having a large military response and presence that says, we're not afraid to use this. And so that's essentially how we are able to insert ourselves into a country and kind of take it over. So Panama is now independent, yay, but the United States is getting ready to really change the concept of that country. It's going to take 10 years. So that little teeny bit, and I always forget how I think it's like maybe not even 20 miles. I don't even think it's 20 miles. It's going to take 10 years to build that. $380 million in 1904 dollars. And sadly, 35,000 workers are going to die. Most all of them, 3,500 workers, 5,600 of them are going to die from accidents or diseases, with most of them being diseases, most of them being malaria. And again, any of you that are interested in the history of medical science or the history of disease or any of that thing is stuff like that is interesting to you. This is where we develop a real scientific medical community in the researching of malaria. We have no idea how these diseases are passed from people to people. We got all kinds of crazy ideas. And this is where we find out that it's mosquitoes, that mosquitoes are transmitting malaria. How do we get rid of malaria? We get rid of these mosquitoes. September 14th, 1914, the Panama Canal is going to open. Sadly, it doesn't have as much fanfare as it would have if this little thing called World War I hadn't already started. So Europe has already begun World War I. For the United States, it cuts 8,000 miles off of the trip from one side to the other. And again, that was the significance of building this canal, and that's why it's so important. And our really last assignment today and tomorrow is looking at this Panama Canal, because it is essentially one of the most important engineering feats of the 20th century. The United States is going to own the Panama Canal, and we'll talk about that at the end, until Jimmy Carter's presidency in the mid-'80s, because we signed a lease, just like you would sign a lease with an apartment. We signed a lease, and at the end, that lease was over, and we turned that back over to the country of Panama, which now makes all the money from ships going through the canal. All right, so we got a couple other things to look at. Is President Taft in Latin America, and we developed this thing called dollar diplomacy. Please do not confuse dollar diplomacy with, hey, we'd like to help you and throw you some dollars. It is the opposite. It is saying, hey, the United States has economic interest in that area, and if Europe, you decide to get involved and mess up our economic presence, we will, again, take any necessary military responses. So again, bless you, that's an issue. Nicaragua being bailed out was a return to the big stick. And again, that's what the idea is going to be, that the United States is now the watchdog of Central and South America. And we do that with our military presence, and we make sure that everybody knows we do not have any trouble using that against you. President Wilson is going to do the same thing, except he's going to add this moral diplomacy. U.S. would not use force, but instead promote human rights. And again, this becomes if you're mean, undemocratic government and we don't like you and we won't recognize you, we can overthrow you. And that's what's going to happen in Mexico. We don't like who the Mexicans chose as their president, so we think it's in our moral interest to overthrow that. Again, that's not democratic. That is not what it means to be a democracy. But that is what this missionary and moral diplomacy means. And again, when we add that word moral, whose morality? And again, it is always in the best interest of what the United States wants to see as that morality. And as such, we get, and I'll come back if you need this, we get one of the most interesting time periods, Pancho Villa. So while you're writing all this down, one of the things as a kid that my parents were not very good at, there's a lot of things, they were not very good at explaining things to us as kids. My parents took us to drive-in movies, because drive-in movies were everywhere. And they took us to drive-in movies because they could take their kids and not have to pay a babysitter, which meant I saw a lot of movies that I should not have seen, not bad movies, but like Western movies. Like I could not figure out, like, how are and where are they getting all these people that they're shooting and killing? Like, are they robbing them out of prisons? I didn't understand the concept of imaginary movies. I think everybody that's getting shot in a movie is really dying. Where do they get all these people? And one of the movies that we go see when we live in West Texas, because my parents didn't tell me this either, like this movie, first of all, it's not real. And second of all, it happened in the 1910s, is Pancho Villa. So when I'm in the fourth grade, I live in fear of Pancho Villa, a man that died in like 1913, because I go and my parents take us to a movie and do not explain to their fourth grader that this, and I know that seems very naive, like, but yeah, it bothered me. So Pancho Villa. And this again, to all of those people that go on TV, I don't know where they're talking about this, that say the United States has never been invaded. We have. There was a war in 1812 where the British came over and burned our capital. And then also Pancho Villa. Pancho Villa is part of the Mexican government that is rebelling against the new government. Pancho Villa rebels, goes into Mexico, kills 18 Americans. Wilson sends John Pershing out to get him, never finds him. Pancho Villa is a wanted man. He's wanted everywhere. $5,000 in 1916 was a lot of money. That was more money than most people made in a year. Looking for Pancho Villa. Never were able to get him. And I think that was the part of the movie that stuck in my head as a kid, that nobody ever found him, and that he's probably out there roaming West Texas while I'm in the fourth grade in 1974. I know it sounds so, but yeah, my parents just never explained like that stuff to me. So the last part before we look, I want to take a second about the Panama Canal and explain to you the significance and the importance of the Panama Canal, especially for Navy purposes, and especially when we think about the Navy during World War II and being able to, instead of having to go all the way around. Has anybody ever been through the Panama Canal? Panama Canal is open to every sailing vessel can go through. I'm fairly certain there's probably cruise ships that go through it. I don't know, because it's wide enough for cruise ships. But the Panama Canal is a lock system. So what happens, and I don't know which side is up or down, but I will just say as pretending we're coming from the Atlantic Ocean. So as we come from the Atlantic Ocean into the Panama Canal, we float into a series of locks, or for a better part, just like a series of concrete barriers. Your ship will float in, and then the gates will lock, and they'll fill that up with water, and then they'll float you to the next one, and then fill you up with water, and then float you to the next one, fill you up with water. And I think the Panama Canal has 4 of these. And then, you sail out into the Pacific Ocean. It is, again, an engineering marvel when you think in 1904 when we started this, there's no computers, everyone's duped, there's no calculators. I know you guys have never had to work with a slide rule, but imagine trying to take those calculus or pre-calc tests without a calculator and using this awful thing called a slide rule. It's horrible. But again, it is one of the most important engineering events to happen to our hemisphere, as well as changing the way that we look at engineering, the way we look at medical science, the movement of the military, and especially ships, and especially when we get to World War II. It will be essential that we can move those ships. So my husband's ship wanted to go through the Panama Canal, but it costs too much money now. And so the United States gave the Panama Canal back to the Panamanians under President Carter's presidency. It was at the time a very controversial move, and President Carter took a lot of criticism for returning it to the Panamanians. But President Carter kind of said, we're a country of our word, and we signed a lease, and they want their Panama Canal back. And so the Panamanians control that now. So on your assignment, there is a last question called extension question. And normally I don't make you do this, but because I think it's important for you to see history still continuing, it asks you to look up an article about the Panama Canal within the last year or so, read it, answer a couple of questions, write a quick summary. In essence, what I want you to know is this thing is still being used. It's still important. It's still vital for shipping, and make sure you know the significance of that canal. All right. The other part of the canal, I'm going to stop my recording. That's really interesting for those of you, any of you thinking about